anything about real estate? Do you know anything about writing? Real estate and writing, do they go together? They do today, because our guest is a home guru who writes a weekly column for a newspaper. My name is Vin Dacquino, and our guest today is Bill Primavera. Bill, let's talk writing.
Let's do.
A pleasure to have you here. We had a fascinating conversation. There's a lot that you have to share with our audience today, and we want to hear it. Who are you? How did you get into all of this? You're a tri-career man, isn't that true?
Tri-career, yes.
Tri-career.
3 careers, right. I am a journalist, I'm a real estate agent, and also I run a public relations firm that's devoted to lifestyles. So somehow I've managed to mesh them all into one livelihood that is very, very time intense, as you might imagine. Basically, I'm a communicator. I started out when I came to New York as a writer on a trade publication dedicated to restaurants. And from there, I was recruited by a public relations firm to represent foods and wines and restaurants, and I really loved that field. I loved being involved with lifestyle accounts.
So, did you actually go into restaurants and taste food and say, and then write about that?
No, I was not a critic. The restaurants would have been in great trouble had I been a critic. But
Tough
I
critic,
did,
right?
Right. I did write about the business of restaurants and the marketing of restaurants, because that was my field. And from there, I was recruited by the Culinary Institute of America when it was very young and not yet in New York State. I was hired as its marketing director when it moved to Hyde Park, New York, and I was assigned the job of making it famous, and I stayed there for 9 years and accomplished that goal.
Wow.
And from there, with that experience, I was able to set up my own public relations firm called Primavera Public Relations, which was established 30 years ago, and today is the oldest continuously operating firm in Westchester County, as far as I know. But it's a national firm. We represent national accounts. Through the years, we've had very high awareness brands like Kraft Foods and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, Nabisco. And currently, I represent Costco Wholesale regionally.
Wow.
We're trying to get them into Yorktown Heights. And at the same time, 10 years ago, after always being interested in real estate, I decided to branch out and use my marketing skills and also get into real estate.
So what you're doing is you're kind of marrying your talents and the writing part of it. I'm always interested in that, and so is our audience. They want to know, what goes into writing a column? You must do some research.
Yes.
Give us a sample of some of the things you write about.
Okay. Well, there are always little triggers that set me off on developing a story. I like it to be informative. I like it to be entertaining, because when you're writing about buying, selling, or fixing up homes, it can be deadly dull. I like to include human interest and humor, if I can, and I'm told that I do that. For instance, recently I realized that I was talking to young buyers, first-time home buyers, and there are lots of abbreviations in the field that people don't know, and you really have to explain to them, such as AO for acceptable offer and FSBO for sale by owner. They don't know what you're talking about, so you have to give this explanation. But I wrote this whole article about all the things in real estate that are abbreviated, but I was convinced that it's just gone too far, because I was very much in a difficult situation with another agent, and I didn't know whether I was going to make a deal with her or not. So I wrote the proposal, and she said that she would be sure to follow up. But she used an abbreviation coming back to me, and she just used the first 2 letters of follow up in her subject line, and I thought that was her answer.
So she said,
it's gone too far.
Yeah, you're right.
So that's how I get my ideas. Or I read an article in the New York Times with something that I might either agree with or disagree with. I've really taken them to task lately, because they did an article about a year ago about how it's equally as important and significant to sell your own home as to get an agent. Well, from all my experience in the field, that's dead wrong. If you're representing yourself to buy or sell a house, you might as well be doing your own brain surgery, as far as I'm concerned. So I took them to task, and I wrote an article about that. It was one of my best articles online. Also, they wrote an article recently about a survey that said that people who rent are happier than people who buy. And the research was so skewed, I couldn't believe it. So I do my own research. I talk to people who are renting, who are aspiring to buying, and I refuted that story as well. So I get my idea from my own experiences.
Right.
If I have a hard time with a deer eating all my hosta, I look into, well, what do you plant that deer hate? Wow. And I write an article about that. So it comes from...
So it's inside the house, outside the house. It could be architecture, it could be swimming pool, it could be the living room, the kitchen.
Or it could just be the living experience itself. How do we feel about the homes that we live in? How do we adjust to living in a home that maybe we shouldn't be living in? Right now, I live in a very, very large house. And, you know, I raised my child there, and I had a business there all these years, but now I'm ready for smaller space. So I'm kind of knocking around in this big house, and I'm anxious now to move on to something that's downsized a little.
We had an interesting guest several months ago. Robert Brown Butler, who is an architect, and he was talking about the spaces that we live in and the fact that there was a time when we wanted space, and now things are turning around and people are downsizing. Right. And they're saying we don't need all this space. You have to heat it, you have to cool it off. There's really a lot of responsibilities when it comes to buying and owning a home.
Right. And you know, it's a very small world because I happen to know Mr. Butler.
Oh.
He happens to be an expert on Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yes,
and at the moment, I'm representing a home that is Frank Lloyd Wright influenced. So I invited him there for his comments on this house and its provenance.
You know what's very interesting? He is one of our weekly writers at the Mayapack Writers Group, and he writes novels as well as books on architecture.
Well, I look forward to seeing him again, maybe at your group.
So people wear different hats. You know, you might remember we were talking about Judge Angelillo, who said as a judge, one of the things that he has to do is write all the time. And he hears the jury, and he hears the witnesses, and he hears the lawyers, and he has to make an opinion based on all of these things that he hears. And then he has to put it together in a logical way so that people can clearly understand where he stands and why. And you do that in your articles. One of the things that you try to do, and you do it quite well, is help the homeowner learn about his home, whether it's to buy it or sell it.
Or fix it.
Or fix it. Now, speaking of that, all of these columns, they're coming together into a book?
Yes, they are.
Let's talk about that.
There it is. There's the
Here
column.
we are. The Musings of the Home Guru.
And I call it musings because I do write about the practical aspects of home ownership. But also I talk about the absurdities of it. You know, the most amazing things that can happen. How you respond to something if your water boiler breaks and suddenly your basement is flooded. You know, how you respond to these things.
One of the things that Robert Brown Butler was talking about was, he said, listen, you need to know, you don't have to be a contractor, but you do have to know some of the things that contractors know, so that when you hire these guys, you have a general idea of what these people are talking about, so that you're not hiring someone to do something you don't need done. So what are some of the tips? This is called Armchair Observations and Advice about Buying, Selling, and Fixing Homes, both practical and absurd.
Yeah, some of them are really absurd. But you know, the fact of the matter is that you have to educate yourself, as you just said.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is to go to trusted sources of information, like a realtor who's been around for a while. I've amassed a whole coterie of people who know how to fix homes. I don't. But with people with whom I've worked, I can recommend them to buyers and sellers when they need help in the house. I use the word armchair because I sit in the armchair. I don't fix anything myself. I'd be terrible at it. But I do know how to source good suppliers, and we have wonderful suppliers in this area.
Yeah, it was an interesting statement someone made to me one time. That they said, Vin, you don't have to know everything to be an expert. What you have to do is know where to find everything.
Right.
So you don't have to be a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter, but you have to know them.
Exactly.
And you have to know who knows what to do best.
Right.
Because costs can vary too.
Very
and
much so.
quality certainly can vary.
You know, there's another aspect to that saying about you don't have to know everything. In the real estate field, it's a very, very complex field that involves many disciplines, including law, land use, construction. You can't possibly know everything. And we say in the field, don't worry that you don't know everything, because your customer or your client is not going to care about how much you know as they care about how much you care. So the first element of being a great realtor is to really care about your buyer or your seller, and to let them know that if you are not the definitive source of the information, you're the source of the source. So they have a problem, you're not the expert on it, you go to a trusted service provider who can help us out.
Now, one of the things that I try to instill in all my writers is that when you are a writer, and when you write something like your column, one of the most amazing things is that it's educational for you as well. So have you learned through your writing?
Oh, yes. I've met the most fabulous people who are the experts, and they've come to be friends. Whenever I have a question, I use them as my sources for my material and my columns. And it's a wonderful way to engage in the community. That's why I originally got in real estate. With my public relations firm, I really didn't have any local accounts. All of my accounts were in other parts of the country. I had offices in New Orleans and Los Angeles, Kansas City. And I didn't spend any time in Upper Westchester or Putnam at all. I didn't know my community. And then I had rather a traumatic experience on 9/11 when I was scheduled to go to Tower 1 just at the moment that the first plane hit. And I had not entered the building as yet, but it was a wake-up call that I really needed to start spending some time at home. So I thought, what can I do at home? What talents do I have where I can make a living just staying primarily in this area? So I started writing for my local newspaper. I didn't know my community. I got involved in politics, and I got involved with my secondary interest, which has now become my primary interest, real estate. And that's how I met people in town and became engaged with them.
Tell me about the writing. What do? You call up the newspaper and say, excuse me, my name's Bill Primavera, and I want to write a column. When do I start?
That's exactly what I did. But because I wanted to promote my real estate business, I said specifically I wanted to be about homes. And in the foreword to my book, my publisher at the Examiner News said, very frankly, he was skeptical that anybody could write a weekly column and keep it relevant on the subject of homes. Well, I've just written my 242nd article, and I don't think I've put out a dull one yet, I hope. So it's been very interesting all along the way.
So will the book be a collection of those articles,
Yes.
or will it be a takeoff on the articles?
It
Be
will
the actual articles?
It will be an abridged version of each article so that it's not too hyper-localized, so that someone can buy the book in Michigan or California and it would still be relevant to them.
Keeping your eye on the audience.
Exactly.
Very important.
Yep.
What you write in a newspaper is not necessarily what you want to put here.
Exactly.
So you're going to edit this thing?
It has already been edited.
Wow.
We're at the stage where we're illustrating it right now, and it should be published within 2 months.
Wow, wonderful. So we're going to be able to get our hands on this thing.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Sounds like a very useful book. You had me laughing. I was going through the computer and going through your website, which incidentally should be on the screen from time to time.
Okay.
While I was going through that, I got a kick out of your anecdotes.
Oh, thank you.
Tell me about your anecdotes and what you do with those.
Well, that's the absurdities of my book. For instance, I was telling you about a situation where I just read a newspaper article, and it was about a neighborhood, and do names of streets affect the value of our homes? I know in this area there's a Watermelon Lane that people die, Watermelon Hill, that people die to live on because it's such a charming name. Well, I read this article about a neighborhood that was complaining that their local motel was housing sex offenders. So I found this kind of interesting. At the very end of the article, almost as throwaway, it gave the address of the motel as being on Sodom Road.
Oh, good
so
Lord.
how could you not report that? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And whenever I see something that is appealing to me or has a reason, for instance, I wrote an article about toilet humor. Have you ever noticed that some toilet bowls are completely round and others are elongated? Have you ever wondered why?
No.
Well, you're a man. Consider the male anatomy. I compared the elongated toilet bowl to a guy going from jockey shorts to boxer shorts. And, you know, it's absurd, and people probably wouldn't think that way. Maybe it's a skewed sense of humor, but people seem to enjoy it.
I mean, so many things in a house are personal in that way. For example, I'm left-handed. And there are many things in houses that are absolutely right-handed.
Right. Just flushing the toilet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there are a whole lot of things to personalize a home.
Oh, you gave me an idea for another story. What do lefties do in a house designed for right-handed people?
Right-handed
Thank you very
people.
much. That's
yeah,
next
there
week.
you go. Good. I'll be looking forward to that article. You also had a little story. I have to laugh because recently we sold our family home in Utica. And we were getting ready to sell it. And my mother said, all right, listen, I have to go bury St. Joseph. And I said, wait, what do you have to do? She said, bury St. Joseph. I said, what does that mean? She said, well, if you get a statue of St. Joseph and you bury it in the yard, upside down, it will help sell the house. Right. I said, are you serious? Well, I looked it up. Yeah. That's absolutely true. Tell your little story about that.
Well, you know, you don't have to be a Catholic to believe that. It works for Jewish people, too.
Okay.
You recommend it to everybody. The story that has come down from the Middle Ages, actually, is that you bury the statue upside down, facing the house. Don't make the mistake of facing away from the house. There is an anecdote about how a person did that. It sold the house across the street, and the house wasn't even for sale across the street. And then there's another story where a guy, and this is a true story, he reported it in his blog, buried the statue and nothing happened. And he tried the different positions, his house would not sell. He got so frustrated, he dug it up and he threw it out. The next week, the town dump sold. So I would absolutely recommend to any buyer bury a statue of St. Joseph.
I was fascinated. My mother said, we've been doing that for years. How could you not have heard that? I said, I didn't. And then I saw your anecdote and laughed. I said, oh my God, there you go. Okay, so tell me a little bit more. Tell me about this whole writing thing. What I want to know is, Bill, you're out selling houses. You're doing this public relations. Where do you find the time to write, and when do you write? Where and when?
It's got to be part of your marketing plan, and it's got to become part of your social life. You get to meet people by doing it. You get to learn, because if I were to calculate my hours and what I make per hour, it would be ridiculous, because I work from morning to night, and usually very late at night I'm thinking about story ideas. Now I'm going to look for all these anecdotes that I can find, or any research on left-handed people dealing with a right-handed house. And usually I do it when I'm ready for bed, and I'm very casually dressed, and I'm doing research online. During the day, I might have talked to someone. For instance, this coming week, I'm going to have a roof shampoo. Do you know what a roof shampoo is? Isn't that a cute name? Not a roof cleaning, a roof shampoo.
That's where they do that. They get all the stains and stuff.
They get all the stains off, the mold stains. And my house has a relatively new roof, but it's quickly developed on the north side of the house stains. It makes my house look old. So I talked to the contractor who came by, who's going to do it for me. I took some video of him, I recorded what he said, and now I'm all ready to go with that information into an article.
Wow, that is interesting. And because there is a science to the kind of writing. Often, You know, when I tell people I'm a host of Let's Talk Writing, and they say, "Oh, wow, so you do like novels?" I said, "No, we do everything." Writing is a huge category, and some people write columns, some people write self-help books, some people write poetry. There's so many different kinds of writing, and you have to understand that, first of all, writing is work, and it takes work to get things together and ideas. And when you draw ideas from your own life, that's the ticket. That's brilliant. And so many people live lives that have a great deal of importance to other people. What you're doing is very handy for people who might suffer some of the consequences of buying a house with something that just doesn't suit their lifestyle.
And you know what else you need to do? You need to live a long life. I sometimes marvel
Good
at
idea.
how...
I'm going to do that.
We're all going to do that. I marvel at how young people can write brilliant novels, because I really didn't start writing creatively. You know, I did all the commercial stuff for public relations, but I really didn't start writing creatively like this till maybe I was in my late 40s, because by that time I had had enough life experience that I could report on. And I write in a very journal style of writing, which I find very accommodating to what I do. Basically, it's my own personal experience. So the more experience, like when people read my columns, they say, "Did all those things actually happen to you?" I was asked, I make this stuff up, and I don't.
No.
If you live in a house, I've lived in my house for 40 years, a lot of stuff happens, and I am an observer, and I feel that I remember things that are of interest to me, and I enjoy reporting.
Now, here's a question for you. You have a very distinct style. Now, does that just come naturally, or did you read a lot of these columns and say, "Hey, I want to write like that"?
I took only a writing course in high school, which I enjoyed for our newspaper in high school, and then I never took another writing course. I studied English in college. But I felt that I developed a good conversational style early on. And everybody always says, "Gee, your column is so accessible, it's conversational." I wouldn't know how to write any other way. And I learned the basics of grammar, so I put those two together, and it comes out, I think, pretty well.
Yeah, that's what I try to do as well. For Hauntings of the Hudson River, it isn't so much about ghosts. It's about my experience with ghosts. And with Sybil Luddington, it was about Sybil, but it's about my experience of researching her and finding out things that I found to be not true. So a combination of research, a combination of saying it your own way, finding who you are in your writing. You're obviously very comfortable in your style.
And when you write about your own experience, that can't be anything but true, because you yourself experience, and that, I think, is projected to the reader.
And, I mean, I told you about the young boy who came to me one time and said, "Mr. Dacquino, how can I write an exciting book if my life is boring?" And I said to him, "You have to write about what if, too. And you have to be able to see beyond." So the thing about your writing that I like very much is that you see the consequences of things. And unfortunately, sometimes people buying houses and selling houses don't understand the consequences. And they don't look into all of the different avenues. For example, heating. They buy a house and it has oil heat, or it has coal heat, or it has something that doesn't work for
Hopefully it still doesn't have coal heat.
I hope not.
A little too primitive.
Yeah, really. But the type of heat, the type of lighting, wiring, all of those things, I would guess that you probably have done an article about inspections.
Yes. And how they can scare the heck out of a potential buyer.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing. And you know, this is why I always advocate, get yourself a realtor, because they can help you anticipate all the probabilities that could happen. You can't walk into a situation as your own representative if you don't have a great deal of experience in housing.
Right.
It can be real troublesome.
So you've written some articles that make you go, "Yeah, that's what I was looking to do."
Thank you.
Can you think of those? What were some of those articles that you're absolutely proud of because you know you did what you set out to do in that article?
I think the one on inspections, actually, and it was,
there you go.
was my own experience that I projected, where I lost a buyer of my own house, which is an antique house, and I had an inspector. I had never known him. He was hired by the buyer. That was great, an independent study, and he came in and he used just one wrong term. You know, a house, from the moment it's built, starts to settle. And sometimes it settles more than other times. But imagine, my house is 275 years old. So of course, it would have settled over that time. But it didn't fall down. It's still standing. Yeah. So he came in, and instead of using the word, the house settled, he said, the house is sinking. And he used it in the present tense. The house is not sunk in at least 200 years. The buyer, who was from an apartment in the Bronx, who had no experience with old antique homes, you know, that have settled, got panicked, and I lost that buyer. So I wrote an article about inspectors have to use a bedside manner too. Don't you know, nothing is not fixable unless it's totally ridden with termites and is about to decay and fall down. Nothing is not fixable, even if something is wrong. So that, I think, was my most compelling article, and I got the most comments on.
Well, what you do is absolutely important. You're doing a service. And what I like most about it is that the service comes from what you do in daily life. And your writing about it shares your expertise with people. And there have been wonderful, brilliant people who have died with their expertise, took it with them. And giving it to people, for example, through a newspaper, is a wonderful idea. So do you recommend being a columnist?
Oh, absolutely. And it's so gratifying when I get calls from Europe and from South America about one of my articles. I wrote an article about raised ranches. People either love or hate the style of a raised ranch. So I wrote both points of view, but for those who happen to have a raised ranch, who don't want it to look like a raised ranch, I happen to have a couple suppliers who make it look like a colonial.
Wow.
So I wrote this article. I get calls from all over the country, internationally, about, can you recommend somebody to me who can turn my raised ranch into a colonial? So I think that I am providing a service, and the internet has made writing, the reach of writing, just totally amazing.
Okay, so here's the question of the day.
Oh, no. Oh, yes.
You're a guru. You're going to write this book. You do columns. Any other kind of writing? Do we have a novel, a Primavera novel coming?
Well, you know what? I met you for the first time this morning at Starbucks.
Already clicked,
and something clicked, and I thought, wow, this guy knows a lot about writing, and I've always had this secret desire to do a novel. I've always written basically reporting, a journal, but I would like to write a novel, and that's next on my agenda.
Well, I've always wanted to sell houses. So we're going to put that together. And you're going to teach me how to sell houses. I'm going to help you with your novel. And we are going to have a novel for you that you cannot resist. And there's already a book coming out 2 months from now. Make sure you keep your eye open, go to Bill's website, and stay with it. Thank you for joining us. And stay tuned to this station for other incredible writers. Thank you for joining us.